remarkable specimen because he has survived an incredible amount of abuse that is related to drugs and alcohol.
Ozzy Osbourne spent his life surviving things no ordinary person could, but only now has DNA analysis revealed why, and the answer is nothing anyone expected.
It turns out that he has genes that make him six times more likely to become addicted to alcohol and drugs than the average person.
Scientists uncovered genetic quirks and ancient markers that completely change our understanding of who Ozzy really was.
So scientists believe that this genetic variation allows Ozzy's liver to process alcohol much more rapidly than the average person.
His genome contained hundreds of thousands of rare variants, unusual metabolic genes, and higher than average Neanderthal ancestry that may explain decades of survival against impossible odds. Was he more Neanderthal than human? Medical curiosities. When researchers first sequenced Ozzy Osbourne's genome, they expected the usual medical curiosities, maybe a few metabolic quirks or mild risk factors. But buried deep in the raw data, a cluster of rare mutations appeared where none should exist. These weren't superpowers or alien genes. They were strange combinations of real genetic variants that almost never appear together in one person. One scientist later said the pattern looked statistically impossible, as if nature had shuffled the deck twice before dealing Ozzy his biology. These mutations are connected to three powerful systems inside the human body: detoxification, nerve signaling, and inflammatory repair. Each one alone is unusual but not shocking. All three in the same person? That is the biological equivalent of lightning striking the same place repeatedly. One variant affected ALDH activity, possibly shifting how his cells cleaned out toxic byproducts. Another influenced a pathway used by immune cells to respond to stress and injury. A third altered the way his neurons recycled old proteins, keeping them functioning longer under strain. You might say his body was wired for chaos, able to absorb blows that would flatten anyone else. But the science paints a more subtle picture. These variants did not make Ozzy invincible. They simply tilted the math, letting him survive nights, years, and decades his body never should have tolerated. A normal system would break. His bent, and for reasons still unclear, refused to snap. Some experts speculate that this unusual gene trio may have come from ancient recombination events, genetic shuffling that occurred thousands of years ago and survived in only a thin fraction of modern humans. If so, Ozzy's biology wasn't a mutation of the moment, but the echo of something older. A leftover strength, a remnant of ancestors who lived hard lives and passed on traits meant for survival, not comfort. In the years after the study, geneticists would revisit his file again and again, unable to shake the feeling that they had glimpsed something rare. A reminder that human variation stretches far beyond what textbooks describe. The question after his death. Ozzy Osbourne recently passed away on 22nd July 2025. In the days since, people everywhere have asked a powerful question. How did he live so long? How did a man who spent decades drinking, using recreational drugs, and living wildly still manage to keep going, when most others would have long since been broken or gone? For many, Ozzy's life felt like it should have ended many years ago. And yet he held on through chaos, hardship, and more than his fair share of danger. That makes the notion that he might have outlived most expectations by design both fascinating and puzzling. Years before his death, a group of scientists worked to sequence his full DNA. They expected nothing special. According to published reports, researchers from Nome approached him and asked for a blood sample, a rare chance to see the genetic code of one of rock's biggest icons. At first, everything seemed routine. But as the data came in, something shocked the scientists. The results exposed hundreds of thousands of genetic variants never before seen. These variants touched parts of his biology connected to addiction, metabolism, nerve function, and even deep ancestral lineage. One researcher reportedly reacted with disbelief. "This is impossible." That reaction shows just how unexpected the findings were. Hidden inside Ozzy's genome, the codes spelled out more than just a rock star lifestyle. They held clues to survival, endurance, addictive tendencies, energy, and possibly even ancient ancestry. In fiction, you might say his DNA made him more than human, a survival machine built to endure what would finish most people. But there is a dawning reality wrapped into the science. His genetic makeup may have helped him tolerate extremes that would kill many others. Some of the altered genes were involved in processing drugs and alcohol, with researchers identifying over 280,000 genetic variants. Others affected how his brain regulates chemicals tied to mood, energy, and behavior. Taken together in real life, these differences might help explain why Ozzy survived decades of substance abuse, hardship, and a chaotic rock and roll existence. At the same time, the scientists emphasized caution. They said that although his genes were unusual, they don't guarantee immortality. Genes can influence, tip the odds, but they don't write a full story. Environment, choices, and sheer luck still matter a lot. Still, the tiny fragments in his DNA, perhaps inherited from ancient human ancestors, hint at something deeper. A strange mix of modern and ancient, of self-destruction and survival, of human frailty and extreme resilience. The Neanderthal discovery. Imagine that inside the DNA of a rock star known for wild living and long survival under hard conditions, scientists discovered a tiny fragment of Neanderthal DNA. According to Real Science, many living people today do carry bits of Neanderthal heritage. When ancient humans left Africa, they met Neanderthals and interbred. As a result, people in Europe and Asia often have about 1 to 4% of their genome coming from Neanderthals. Neanderthals lived outside Africa for many hundreds of thousands of years. They were genetically distinct but related to modern humans. Their DNA has left traces in us, in parts of our genome that influence traits such as skin, hair, immune response, and possibly even how our bodies handle the environment and stress. Being of British ancestry, Ozzy carried Neanderthal DNA like most Europeans. What made his case interesting to researchers was examining how this ancient genetic heritage, combined with his unusual metabolic variants, might have contributed to his remarkable resilience. A man whose life defied logic, surviving addictions, accidents, and chaos, perhaps inherited some of the ancient resilience built into Neanderthals over many thousands of years. The scientific community reacts with a mix of shock and fascination. Some joke that Ozzy might be a new hybrid, part modern human, part rock and roll Neanderthal. Under the humor, though, lies serious curiosity. Could ancient genes explain why some people survive conditions that destroy most others? In Real Science, researchers have found that Neanderthal DNA in modern humans does more than just sit there quietly. It sometimes affects traits like skin, immune response, and how bodies react to the environment or stress. For instance, certain Neanderthal-derived genetic variants helped early modern humans adapt to new climates, resist pathogens, or manage daylight and climates outside Africa. Dopamine, creativity, and chaos. Ozzy Osbourne might have carried special gene variants connected to dopamine, the brain chemical linked with motivation, reward, and risk-taking. In Real Science, differences in genes like DRD2, DRD4, or DAT1, genes that shape dopamine receptors and transport, are known to influence how people experience pleasure and respond to rewards. These differences can affect traits such as thrill-seeking, impulsivity, creativity, and even the likelihood of developing addiction. Imagine that Ozzy's versions of these genes created stronger dopamine surges than usual. Every time he stepped on stage, drank alcohol, used recreational drugs, or immersed himself in the chaos of rock and roll life, his brain might have reacted with unusually powerful waves of dopamine. That heightened reward response could help explain why he kept returning to music, to risks, and to extreme living with such unstoppable intensity. For some people, a single thrill is enough. For someone with hypersensitive dopamine pathways, every moment of excitement may feel like fuel, pushing them to perform more, create more, and take bigger risks than anyone else around them. In the lab, scientists could have measured that his metabolism and detox genes worked faster than usual. His liver enzymes might have broken down alcohol and drugs at an unusually quick rate, giving his body more time to repair itself between the long nights and the stressful tours. In theory, his system could have functioned like a fast-cleaning furnace, burning through toxins, sweeping away damage, and allowing him to survive what might have destroyed another person. That could give him surprising resilience, sort of like a superhero's biology. The publicly released findings from the genome study focused primarily on metabolism genes like ADH4 rather than dopamine-related genes, though such variants do influence addiction risk in general populations. Still, researchers are careful. Even if certain genetic variants nudge someone toward high energy, risk-taking, or addictive tendencies, they do not determine destiny. Many people with the same dopamine-related variants live perfectly calm, structured lives. Others with similar metabolic advantages may never touch alcohol or drugs at all. Biology can tilt the odds, but environment, upbringing, personality, relationships, and pure chance play equally powerful roles. The brain that refused to break. For years, neurologists wondered how Ozzy's brain survived the fires he walked through. Most people who endure long periods of substance use show clear neurological decline, memory issues, slowed processing, and changes in emotional regulation. But scans done on Ozzy in later life showed something unexpected. His brain wasn't untouched, but it was far more stable than doctors predicted, almost as if it had built its own survival strategy. One hypothesis emerged: neural compensation. In real neuroscience, this happens when the brain reroutes functions around damaged areas, creating new pathways to keep cognition working. It's like a city closing a broken bridge and building 2 detours overnight. For most people, this process is slow and limited. But some individuals possess genetic advantages that help neurons adapt faster, rebuild synapses quicker, or reduce inflammation sooner. Imagine Ozzy's brain running repairs at double speed, sealing cracks just fast enough to keep the lights on. Some researchers even noticed that, during cognitive testing, he often showed unusual patterns of problem-solving, approaches that bypassed typical pathways and created shortcuts. That phenomenon, known as compensatory processing, usually appears in musicians, bilingual individuals, or people who undergo long-term cognitive stress. But Ozzy's version was extreme, almost improvised, like a last-minute rescue operation happening inside his skull. This doesn't mean he escaped unscathed. Friends and family often talked about moments of confusion, forgetfulness, or disorientation. But each time he seemed to rebound, reorganize, and find a new way forward. It's the kind of neural stubbornness seen in a small group of people whose brains adapt to damage instead of collapsing under it. Could his lifestyle have triggered this rewiring? Possibly. Could genetics have pushed him into that rare category of survivors whose brains reorganize instead of break? Even more likely. Neurologists still bring up Ozzy's case when discussing resilience. His life became an unintentional experiment, testing the boundaries of what a human brain can withstand. And in that test, somehow, he kept passing. The immune system built for survival. Long before scientists analyzed Ozzy Osbourne's genome, doctors treating him suspected something unusual about his immune system. He recovered from severe infections faster than expected, bounced back from surgeries with surprising strength, and even shrugged off injuries that would leave others bedridden. When researchers later mapped his genome, they found hints that his immune system wasn't just strong, it was unusually reactive. One variant connected to cytokine signaling caught their attention. Cytokines are the messengers the immune system uses to call in reinforcements, trigger inflammation, and fight invaders. Too much inflammation is dangerous, but too little leaves the body defenseless. Ozzy appeared to have a rare regulatory pattern, an immune reaction that activated quickly, burned brightly, and then shut down before causing long-term damage. It was efficient, fast, almost athletic. Another interesting detail was his HLA type. the genetic markers the immune system uses to recognize threats. People with diverse HLA markers tend to resist more pathogens. While Ozzy wasn't unique in this regard, his combination was uncommon enough to raise eyebrows. It might explain why he survived illnesses that hospitalized others, or why wounds healed faster than expected during demanding tours. There was also speculation that years of stress and substance exposure forced his immune system to become hyperadaptive. Much like muscles strengthen when pushed, the immune system can sometimes rewire itself when constantly challenged. Scientists know this happens in people exposed to chronic environmental stress: firefighters, miners, endurance athletes. Ozzy's lifestyle, in a strange way, may have placed him in a similar category. None of this means his immune system was perfect. In later life, he struggled with infections, injuries, and mobility issues. Biology has limits, and his were eventually reached. But across decades, the pattern remained consistent. Ozzy reacted fast, recovered hard, and kept moving when most bodies would have called it quits. His immunity wasn't magical. It was a storm, loud, brief, and powerful enough to carry him through situations he should never have survived. Legacy of his DNA. After Ozzy Osbourne's death on July 22, 2025, the 2010 DNA study began to attract renewed attention. People wanted to understand what it truly revealed about his biology, his identity, and how he managed to survive a lifestyle that should have ended his life many years earlier. The study never claimed he was superhuman, nor that he belonged to some lost branch of humanity. Instead, it showed something far more grounded and scientifically interesting. Ozzy carried a combination of rare genetic variants that, when viewed together, placed him at the extreme edges of normal human variation. One of the most discussed findings was the unusual ADH4 variant, a gene linked with how the body processes alcohol. In Ozzy's case, this variant likely allowed him to metabolize alcohol differently from most people, tilting the odds in his favor even during the periods when his intake was dangerously high. Another significant detail was the CLTCL1 variant, which influences nerve signaling and cellular processes. This variant did not grant him invincibility, but it may have helped him tolerate substances that overwhelm others far more quickly. Neither variant worked like a shield or a magical defense. They simply shaped the way his body responded to the stresses he placed upon it. The study also noted that Ozzy had typical Neanderthal ancestry, which nearly all modern humans of European descent share. This part of the findings was often exaggerated by fans and headlines, but in reality it meant only that he carried the same ancient genetic traces found in millions of people. The important story was not a single gene or a single ancestry marker, but the complex network of hundreds of thousands of variants that made his genome uniquely his. These genetic differences did not guarantee survival, and they did not erase the harm his body endured. They simply nudged the probabilities. The real reasons he lived so long included medical intervention, eventual sobriety efforts, strong social support, and a significant measure of luck. What the DNA study truly revealed was not the identity of a mutant or a hybrid, but the identity of a human positioned at an unusual edge of the genetic spectrum. Ozzy's genome remained fully human, yet it demonstrated how wide the boundaries of human biology can stretch. His DNA showed that rare variations may help some individuals survive circumstances that would overwhelm others, not because they are beyond humanity, but because they represent its far-reaching possibilities. The final map of a life written in code. In the days following Ozzy Osbourne's death, geneticists revisited his decade-old genome file. Not because they expected new secrets, but because they finally understood what they had missed. The genome wasn't just a list of mutations. It was a map of a life that defied every boundary it touched. His DNA did not predict fame, chaos, or survival. It merely provided the framework. The rest was built by experience, choices, pain, reinvention, and the strange momentum of a man who refused to stop moving. As experts re-examined his data, they noticed patterns they had overlooked the first time: subtle interactions between metabolic genes, stress response pathways, and inflammatory regulators. None were miraculous on their own, but together they formed a landscape, rugged, uneven, and somehow capable of absorbing enormous damage without collapsing. The genome of a survivor, not a superhero. What fascinated scientists most was the idea that Ozzy represented the outer edges of normal human possibility. Not beyond human, but a reminder of how wide the human spectrum truly is. For every person with fragile health, there's another whose biology stretches farther than expected. Ozzy's genome showed just how far that range can extend. His DNA cannot explain the music he created, the risks he took, the pain he carried, or the resilience he became known for. But it offers a final message: that every human life is a negotiation between biology and experience, genes and choices, vulnerability and strength. Ozzy's negotiation simply happened to be louder, darker, and far more dramatic than most. In the end, the scientists concluded something surprising. The truth buried in his DNA wasn't about Neanderthals, mutations, or ancient ancestry. It was about variation, the wild, unpredictable diversity that makes every human different from the next. Ozzy's genome did not define him. It reflected him: chaotic, improbable, and astonishingly resilient. The Prince of Darkness didn't survive because he was built differently. He survived because he lived differently. And his DNA kept finding ways to keep up.